In 1969, the Apollo 11 mission landed humans on the moon using a computer with just 64 kilobytes of memory. Today, your average smartphone has over a million times that power, and yet, we still can't predict how this exponential growth will change society in the next 50 years. What happens when technology outpaces our ability to control it, or even understand it?
Wait, really? A million times more powerful? That's insane. I mean, I know my phone is fast, but I never thought about it in those terms. So, if we've come this far in just 50 years, where are we even headed? And more importantly, how did we get here so quickly?
Exactly, and that's the question that keeps technologists up at night. This isn't just about faster computers or cooler gadgets, it's about how these tools have rewired human behavior, economies, and even our biology. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, but the pace of change is so rapid that we're struggling to keep up, ethically and practically.
So, let's start at the beginning. How did we go from, like, fire and the wheel to AI and quantum computing? What was the first real leap that set all of this in motion?
The first major leap wasn't a single invention, it was a shift in how we think about tools. Around 2.5 million years ago, early humans started using stone tools, but it wasn't until the agricultural revolution, roughly 10,000 years ago, that we began domesticating plants and animals. That's when we stopped being nomadic and started building permanent settlements, which led to cities, trade, and eventually, the first technologies we'd recognize today.
Okay, but that's still a slow burn. When did things start to speed up? I mean, the Industrial Revolution is often cited as a turning point, right? What was it about that era that changed everything?
The Industrial Revolution, which kicked off in the late 1700s, was the first time technology began to accelerate exponentially. Before that, progress was linear, each generation improved on the last, but not by much. The steam engine, invented by James Watt in 1776, was a game changer because it allowed us to harness energy in ways we never could before. Suddenly, factories could operate 24/7, transportation became faster, and goods could be produced at scale.
That makes sense, but I've always wondered, why did it start in Britain? Was it just luck, or were there specific reasons that gave them an edge? And how did it spread so quickly to the rest of the world?
Great question. Britain had a few key advantages: abundant coal reserves, a stable political system, and a strong network of colonies that provided raw materials and markets. But the real catalyst was the culture of innovation. The British were obsessed with improving efficiency, and they had a legal system that protected intellectual property, which encouraged inventors to take risks. Once the revolution took off, it spread like wildfire because other countries saw the economic and military advantages of industrialization.
That's fascinating. But let's fast forward a bit. The 20th century is when things really start to get wild, right? I mean, we went from the first airplane flight in 1903 to landing on the moon in 1969. How did that happen so fast?
The 20th century was defined by two world wars and the Cold War, and those conflicts acted as accelerants for technological progress. Governments poured unprecedented amounts of money into research and development, not just for military purposes but also to outpace their rivals. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, is a perfect example. It brought together the brightest minds in physics and engineering and gave them virtually unlimited resources.
Wow, so war was actually a driver of innovation? That's kind of dark, but I guess it makes sense. But what about the internet? That's probably the biggest technological leap of the last 50 years. How did that even come about?
The Internet's origins are deeply rooted in the Cold War, too. In the 1960s, the U.S. Department of Defense wanted a communication network that could survive a nuclear attack. The solution was ARPANET, a decentralized network that could reroute data if parts of it were destroyed. The first message was sent in 1969, the same year as the moon landing, but it wasn't until the 1990s that the Internet became accessible to the public.
Wait, so the internet was originally a military project? That's wild. But what about the World Wide Web? Isn't that different from the internet? I feel like people use those terms interchangeably, but they're not the same thing, right?
Exactly, and that's a common misconception. The Internet is the infrastructure, the physical network of cables, servers, and protocols that allows computers to communicate. The World Wide Web, on the other hand, is a system of interlinked documents and applications that runs on top of the Internet. It was invented by Tim Berners-Lee in 1989 while he was working at CERN, the European Particle Physics Lab. His goal was to create a way for scientists to share information more easily.
That's such a simple idea, but it changed everything. I mean, the web is now the backbone of modern life, shopping, communication, entertainment, you name it. But let's talk about the people behind these inventions. Who were some of the unsung heroes of the tech revolution?
One of the most underrated figures is Ada Lovelace, who is often called the world's first computer programmer. In the 1840s, she worked with Charles Babbage on his analytical engine, a mechanical computer that was never built. But Lovelace wrote the first algorithm intended to be processed by a machine, and she even predicted that computers could one day compose music or create art, something that seemed impossible at the time.
Ada Lovelace? I've never heard of her. That's incredible. So, she was basically envisioning AI before we even had electricity. But what about more recent figures? Who shaped the tech landscape we know today?
Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, is a huge one. In 1965, he observed that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years, which became known as Moore's Law. This prediction held true for decades and became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Chip manufacturers raced to keep up with it, driving the exponential growth of computing power. Without Moore's Law, we wouldn't have smartphones, cloud computing, or even modern AI.
Moore's Law is such a fundamental concept, but I don't think most people realize how much it's shaped our world. But here's a question: why did it take so long for personal computers to become a thing? I mean, the first computers were these massive, room-sized machines. When did they start to get small enough for everyday use?
The shift to personal computing really took off in the 1970s, thanks to a few key innovations. The Altair 8800, released in 1975, was the first commercially successful personal computer, but it was still a kit that hobbyists had to assemble themselves. Then, in 1977, Apple released the Apple II, which was the first mass-market personal computer with a keyboard, monitor, and color graphics. That's when computing started to become accessible to the average person.
That's wild to think about. Personal computers have only been around for about 50 years. But what about the software side of things? I mean, hardware is one thing, but without software, computers are just expensive paperweights. Who were the key players there?
Bill Gates and Paul Allen, the founders of Microsoft, played a huge role in making software accessible. In 1980, they struck a deal with IBM to provide the operating system for their first personal computer, which became MS-DOS. That deal gave Microsoft a monopoly on PC software and set the stage for Windows, which dominated the market for decades. But there were other players, too, like Steve Jobs, who revolutionized user interfaces with the Macintosh in 1984.
The Macintosh. That was the first computer with a graphical user interface, right? I remember seeing ads for it when I was a kid. It looked so futuristic compared to everything else. But let's talk about the internet again. How did it go from being a niche tool for scientists to the global phenomenon it is today?
The internet's transformation into a global phenomenon was driven by a few key developments. First, the invention of the World Wide Web in 1989 made it user-friendly. Then, in the mid-1990s, the US government opened up the internet to commercial use, which led to the dot-com boom. Companies like Netscape, which released the first popular web browser in 1994, made it easy for people to access the web. By the late 1990s, the internet was no longer just for academics and the military, it was for everyone.
The dot-com boom is such a fascinating period. I remember hearing stories about people becoming millionaires overnight, but then the bubble burst. What happened there, and why did it crash so hard?
The dot-com bubble was a classic case of irrational exuberance. Investors poured money into any company with a .com in its name, regardless of whether it had a viable business model. At the peak in 2000, the Nasdaq hit an all-time high, but many of these companies were burning through cash with no path to profitability. When the bubble burst, the Nasdaq lost nearly 80% of its value, and hundreds of companies went bankrupt. But the crash also weeded out the weak players and paved the way for the next generation of internet giants like Google and Amazon.
That's such a roller coaster. But let's talk about something even bigger: smartphones. The iPhone was released in 2007, and it completely changed the game. How did we go from flip phones to having a supercomputer in our pockets in just a few years?
The iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, but it was the first one that truly felt like a computer in your pocket. Before that, phones were primarily for calling and texting, with some basic internet capabilities. Apple's innovation was combining a multi-touch screen, a powerful operating system, and a sleek design into a single device. But the real revolution was the App Store, which launched in 2008 and allowed developers to create software specifically for mobile devices. That's when smartphones became indispensable.
The App Store is such a brilliant idea. It turned the iPhone into a platform, not just a device. But here's something I've always wondered: why did it take so long for other companies to catch up? I mean, Android was around before the iPhone, but it didn't really take off until after Apple's success.
Android was actually acquired by Google in 2005, but it was originally designed as an operating system for digital cameras. When the iPhone was announced, Google pivoted and retooled Android to compete in the smartphone market. The first Android phone, the HTC Dream, was released in 2008, but it wasn't until 2010 that Android started to gain real traction. Apple's head start gave them a massive advantage, but Android's open-source nature allowed it to spread quickly and dominate the global market.
That's such a smart strategy: open source versus proprietary. But let's talk about the darker side of all this innovation. With every technological leap, there are consequences, right? What are some of the unintended side effects of the tech revolution?
One of the biggest unintended consequences is the erosion of privacy. The internet was built on the idea of openness and sharing, but that's led to a world where our personal data is constantly being collected, analyzed, and monetized. Companies like Facebook and Google have built empires on targeted advertising, and while that's made their services free for users, it's also created a surveillance economy that many people don't even realize exists.
That's so true. I remember when Facebook first started, it was just a fun way to connect with friends. Now, it feels like we're the product. But what about the impact on jobs? I've heard that automation and AI are going to replace millions of jobs. Is that really happening, or is it just fear-mongering?
It's not fear-mongering, it's already happening. A 2017 study by McKinsey estimated that up to 30% of tasks and 60% of occupations could be automated using existing technology. That doesn't mean all those jobs will disappear, but it does mean they'll change dramatically. For example, self-checkout kiosks in grocery stores have already replaced many cashier jobs, and autonomous vehicles could do the same for truck drivers in the near future. The challenge is ensuring that workers have the skills to adapt.
That's a scary thought. But what about the positive side? Technology has also created entirely new industries and opportunities. What are some of the most exciting developments happening right now?
One of the most exciting areas is artificial intelligence. AI is already being used in everything from healthcare to finance, and it's only going to become more powerful. For example, AI algorithms can now detect diseases like cancer with greater accuracy than human doctors in some cases. There's also the rise of renewable energy technologies, like solar and wind power, which are becoming cheaper and more efficient every year. And let's not forget about space exploration. Companies like SpaceX are making it possible to imagine a future where humans live on Mars.
AI is definitely the big one. But it's also kind of terrifying, right? I mean, we're talking about machines that can think and learn on their own. What happens if they get too smart? Are we opening Pandora's box here?
That's the million-dollar question. AI has the potential to solve some of humanity's biggest challenges, like climate change and disease, but it also poses existential risks. Elon Musk and other tech leaders have warned that superintelligent AI could one day surpass human control, leading to scenarios that are hard to predict. The key is to develop AI responsibly, with safeguards in place to ensure it aligns with human values. But that's easier said than done.
It's all so overwhelming. But let's bring it back to the present. What's one thing that most people don't realize about the current state of technology? Something that's happening right now that will shape the next decade?
Most people don't realize how quickly quantum computing is advancing. Traditional computers use bits, which are either 0 or 1, but quantum computers use qubits, which can be both 0 and 1 at the same time thanks to a property called superposition. This allows quantum computers to perform calculations at speeds that are unimaginable with classical computers. Google claimed quantum supremacy in 2019, meaning their quantum computer solved a problem in 200 seconds that would take a supercomputer 10,000 years. If this technology matures, it could revolutionize everything from drug discovery to cryptography.
Quantum computing sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But if it's that powerful, what are the risks? I mean, couldn't it break encryption and make all our data vulnerable?
Absolutely. Quantum computers could render current encryption methods obsolete, which would have massive implications for cybersecurity. Governments and corporations are already working on post-quantum cryptography to prepare for this, but it's a race against time. On the flip side, quantum computing could also enable breakthroughs in materials science, allowing us to create things like room temperature superconductors, which would revolutionize energy transmission.
That's both exciting and terrifying. But let's zoom out for a second. When we look at the entire arc of technological evolution, what are the biggest lessons we can take from history? What should we be thinking about as we move forward?
The first lesson is that technology is never neutral. Every invention has unintended consequences, and it's our responsibility to anticipate and mitigate them. The second lesson is that progress is not inevitable, it requires deliberate effort, investment, and sometimes, a bit of luck. Finally, the most transformative technologies are often the ones that empower individuals, not just institutions. The printing press, the personal computer, and the smartphone all democratized access to information and tools, and that's what drives real change.
Those are some powerful lessons. But what about on a personal level? How can the average person navigate this rapidly changing world? It feels like if you blink, you might miss the next big thing.
The key is to stay curious and adaptable. Technology is moving so fast that the skills you learn today might be obsolete in a few years, so lifelong learning is essential. But it's also important to remember that technology is a tool, not a replacement for human connection or creativity. The most successful people in the future won't be the ones who know the most about tech, but the ones who know how to use it to solve real problems and make a difference in the world.
That's such a great point. Technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's one thing you're personally excited about in the next decade? Something that keeps you up at night in a good way.
I'm really excited about the potential of gene editing technologies like CRISPR. We're on the cusp of being able to cure genetic diseases, enhance human health, and even extend lifespans. But it also raises ethical questions. Where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? How do we ensure this technology is used responsibly? It's a frontier that's both thrilling and terrifying, and I can't wait to see how it unfolds.
CRISPR is definitely a game changer. I mean, the idea that we could edit our own DNA is mind-blowing. But you're right, it's also a huge responsibility. Alright, let's bring this home. What's the one big question you want listeners to take away from this conversation?
The big question is this: how do we ensure that technology continues to serve humanity, rather than the other way around? We've seen how powerful these tools can be, but we've also seen the risks. The next decade will be defined by how we answer that question, whether we use technology to create a more equitable, sustainable, and compassionate world, or whether we let it divide us further. The choice is ours.
That's a heavy but important question to leave people with. If this conversation resonated with you, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What's one technological advancement you're most excited or worried about? Drop a comment below.
And if you found this episode valuable, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. It really helps us grow and keep these conversations going. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, remember, technology is what we make of it. Let's make it something amazing.
In 1822, Charles Babbage designed the first mechanical computer, the difference engine, but it was never completed. Fast forward to today, and we're building quantum computers that can solve problems in seconds that would take classical computers millennia. The pace of change is accelerating, and it's not slowing down anytime soon.
That's such a stark contrast. I mean, Babbage's machine was supposed to calculate mathematical tables, and now we're talking about computers that could potentially break encryption or simulate entire universes. How did we go from gears and levers to qubits and quantum states in less than 200 years?
It's all about the convergence of multiple breakthroughs. The invention of the transistor in 1947 replaced bulky vacuum tubes, making computers smaller and more reliable. Then, in 1958, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments created the first integrated circuit, which packed multiple transistors onto a single chip. That's when computing power started to grow exponentially, following Moore's law. Each of these innovations built on the last, creating a snowball effect that's still rolling today.
Moore's law again. It's crazy how one observation turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's something I've always wondered: why did it take so long for computers to become user-friendly? I mean, early computers were these massive, intimidating machines that only experts could use. When did that change?
The shift to user-friendly computing really took off in the 1970s and 1980s, thanks to a few key innovations. The Xerox Alto, developed in 1973, was the first computer with a graphical user interface, GUI, and a mouse, but it was never sold commercially. Steve Jobs saw the Alto during a visit to Xerox PARC in 1979 and was inspired to create the Macintosh, which brought the GUI to the masses in 1984. That's when computers started to feel accessible to everyday people.
The Macintosh was such a game changer. I remember my dad telling me stories about how revolutionary it felt to use a computer that didn't require typing in arcane commands. But let's talk about the internet again. How did it evolve from a military project to the backbone of modern life?
The internet's evolution can be broken down into a few key phases. The first phase was ARPANET, which connected universities and research institutions in the 1970s. The second phase was the commercialization of the internet in the 1990s, which led to the dot-com boom. The third phase was the rise of Web 2.0 in the 2000s, which introduced social media, user-generated content, and interactive web applications. Each of these phases built on the last, creating the internet we know today.
Web 2.0 is such a fascinating concept. It turned the internet from a static library into a dynamic, interactive space. But what about the next phase? I've heard people talk about Web 3.0. What is that, and how is it different?
Web 3.0 is still a bit of a buzzword, but the core idea is to create a decentralized internet where users have more control over their data. Right now, most of the internet is controlled by a handful of tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Web 3.0 aims to change that by using blockchain technology to create a more open, transparent, and user-owned web. It's still in its early stages, but it could be the next big evolution of the internet.
Blockchain is such a hot topic right now. I mean, it's the technology behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but it's also being used for everything from supply chain management to voting systems. But what exactly is it, and why is it so revolutionary?
Blockchain is essentially a decentralized ledger that records transactions across a network of computers. Unlike traditional databases, which are controlled by a single entity, blockchains are maintained by a distributed network of nodes, making them incredibly secure and transparent. The first blockchain was created in 2008 by an anonymous person or group known as Satoshi Nakamoto, as the underlying technology for Bitcoin. Since then, it's been adapted for countless other uses.
That's so cool. But let's talk about the downsides. I've heard that blockchain is incredibly energy intensive, especially for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Is that true, and if so, why?
It's absolutely true. Bitcoin's blockchain uses a consensus mechanism called proof of work, which requires miners to solve complex mathematical problems to validate transactions. This process consumes an enormous amount of energy. Some estimates suggest that Bitcoin mining uses more electricity than entire countries. That's why there's been a push toward more sustainable alternatives, like proof of stake, which uses far less energy but achieves the same goal of securing the network.
That's a huge issue. But let's switch gears a bit. What about the role of government in all of this? Technology has evolved so quickly that laws and regulations often struggle to keep up. How have governments responded to these rapid changes, and what are some of the biggest challenges they face?
Governments have had a mixed track record when it comes to regulating technology. On one hand, they've played a crucial role in funding early research and development, like the Internet and GPS, which were both military projects. On the other hand, they've often been slow to adapt to new technologies, leading to regulatory gaps that can be exploited. For example, social media platforms like Facebook operated for years with little oversight, which contributed to issues like misinformation and data privacy scandals.
That's such a good point. I mean, the GDPR in Europe was a step in the right direction for data privacy, but it's still a patchwork of regulations. What do you think is the biggest challenge governments face when it comes to regulating technology today?
The biggest challenge is balancing innovation with protection. Technology moves so fast that by the time a law is passed, it's often already outdated. Governments need to create flexible, adaptive regulatory frameworks that can keep up with the pace of change while still protecting consumers and society. They also need to collaborate internationally, because technology doesn't respect borders. A great example is the debate over AI regulation. How do you create rules that encourage innovation while preventing harm?
That's such a tough balance to strike. But let's talk about something more positive: the role of technology in solving global challenges. I mean, we've talked a lot about the risks, but what are some of the ways technology is being used to make the world a better place?
There are so many examples. In healthcare, AI is being used to diagnose diseases earlier and more accurately than ever before. In agriculture, precision farming techniques are helping to increase crop yields while reducing water and pesticide use. Renewable energy technologies, like solar and wind power, are becoming more efficient and affordable, which is crucial for combating climate change. And let's not forget about education. Online learning platforms are making education accessible to people all over the world, regardless of their location or socioeconomic status.
Those are all incredible advancements. But what about the digital divide? I mean, not everyone has access to these technologies, and that gap seems to be widening. How do we ensure that everyone benefits from these innovations, not just the wealthy or the tech savvy?
The digital divide is one of the biggest challenges of our time. According to the UN, nearly half of the world's population still doesn't have access to the internet. Closing this gap requires a combination of infrastructure investment, policy changes, and public-private partnerships. For example, companies like Google and Facebook have experimented with projects like Loon and Free Basics to bring internet access to remote areas, but these efforts have had mixed success. Ultimately, it's going to take a global effort to ensure that everyone has access to the tools they need to thrive in the digital age.
That's such an important issue. But let's bring it back to the individual. What's one thing that people can do to stay ahead of the curve in this rapidly changing world? I mean, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the new technologies coming out.
The best thing you can do is to cultivate a mindset of lifelong learning. Technology is evolving so quickly that the skills you learn today might be obsolete in a few years, so it's important to stay curious and adaptable. Take online courses, attend workshops, or even just follow tech news to stay informed. But it's also important to remember that technology is just a tool. It's how you use it that matters. Focus on solving real problems and making a difference, and you'll always stay ahead of the curve.
That's such great advice. But before we go, I have to ask, what's one technology that you think is overhyped right now? Something that's getting a lot of attention but might not live up to the hype.
I think the metaverse is a bit overhyped at the moment. Don't get me wrong, virtual and augmented reality have a lot of potential, especially in areas like education, healthcare, and remote work. But the idea of a fully immersive, interconnected virtual world where people live, work, and play is still a long way off. Right now, it feels like a solution in search of a problem, and I'm not convinced that people actually want to spend their lives in a digital world when the real one is so rich and complex.
That's a fair take. I mean, I love the idea of VR for gaming or training simulations, but I'm not sure I want to live in a virtual world. Alright, let's wrap this up. What's the one thing you want listeners to remember from this conversation?
The one thing I want listeners to remember is that technology is a reflection of humanity. It's shaped by our values, our ambitions, and our flaws. The tools we create can either divide us or bring us together, and it's up to us to decide how we use them. The future isn't something that happens to us, it's something we create, one decision at a time.
That's such a powerful way to put it. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you.
And if you found this conversation valuable, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. It really helps us grow and keep these discussions going. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Stay curious and keep exploring the world around you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, remember, technology is what we make of it. Let's make it something extraordinary.
In 1995, only 1% of the world's population had access to the internet. Today, that number is over 60%, and it's growing every day. But here's the thing, while the internet has connected billions of people, it's also created new forms of inequality, from the digital divide to the spread of misinformation. How do we ensure that the next wave of technological innovation benefits everyone, not just a privileged few?
That's such a critical question. I mean, the internet has been a force for good in so many ways. It's democratized information, connected people across the globe, and created new economic opportunities. But it's also been used to spread hate, manipulate elections, and exploit personal data. How do we maximize the benefits while minimizing the harms?
It starts with recognizing that technology is not inherently good or bad, it's how we use it that matters. The internet was originally designed as an open, decentralized network, but over time, it's become dominated by a handful of powerful corporations. To create a more equitable digital future, we need to rethink the incentives that drive innovation. That means supporting open source projects, advocating for stronger privacy protections, and ensuring that marginalized communities have a seat at the table when new technologies are developed.
That's such a great point. But let's talk about the role of education. I feel like a lot of people don't understand how these technologies work, which makes it harder for them to advocate for themselves. How can we improve digital literacy so that everyone can participate in the conversation?
Digital literacy is absolutely essential. It's not just about knowing how to use a smartphone or a computer, it's about understanding the underlying principles of technology, like how algorithms work, how data is collected and used, and how to protect your privacy online. Schools need to incorporate digital literacy into their curricula, and governments need to invest in programs that teach these skills to adults. But it's also on us as individuals to take the initiative and educate ourselves.
That's so true. I mean, I consider myself pretty tech-savvy, but there's still so much I don't understand. But let's talk about the future. What's one emerging technology that you think has the potential to change the world in the next decade, for better or worse?
I think brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, have the potential to be a game changer. Companies like Neuralink are already working on implantable devices that can read and write to the brain, which could revolutionize everything from healthcare to communication. Imagine being able to control a computer with your thoughts, or restore mobility to people with paralysis. But it also raises huge ethical questions. What happens when our thoughts are no longer private? How do we ensure that these technologies are accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy?
BCIs sound like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. I mean, the idea that we could one day communicate telepathically is mind-blowing. But you're right, it's also terrifying. What happens if someone hacks into your brain? Or if these technologies are used for surveillance or manipulation? How do we even begin to regulate something like that?
Regulating BCIs is going to be one of the biggest challenges of the next decade. We're going to need international cooperation to create ethical guidelines and safeguards, similar to how we've approached nuclear technology or genetic engineering. But it's also going to require a cultural shift. We need to start thinking about the brain as something that deserves the same protections as our physical bodies. That's going to take time, but it's a conversation we need to start having now.
That's such an important conversation. But let's bring it back to the present. What's one thing that people can do today to prepare for the future of technology? Something actionable that doesn't require a PhD in computer science.
Start by taking control of your digital life. That means using strong, unique passwords, enabling two-factor authentication, and being mindful of the data you share online. It also means supporting companies and organizations that prioritize privacy and ethical innovation. But most importantly, it means staying informed and engaged. Technology is shaping our world in profound ways, and we all have a role to play in ensuring that it's used for good.
Those are all such practical steps. I think a lot of people feel powerless when it comes to technology, but it's empowering to know that there are things we can do to protect ourselves and shape the future. Alright, let's wrap this up. What's the one big takeaway you want listeners to remember from this episode?
The big takeaway is that technology is not destiny, it's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for harm. The future of technology is not something that happens to us, it's something we create together. Whether we're talking about AI, quantum computing, or brain-computer interfaces, the choices we make today will shape the world for generations to come. So let's make those choices wisely.
That's such a powerful message. If you found this episode thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you.
And if you enjoyed this conversation, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. It really helps us grow and keep these discussions going. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, remember, technology is what we make of it. Let's make it something incredible.